Greetings, sir. I am here to give a speech on the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict. While it has been over 3 months ever since Russia invaded a full-scale invasion, or as the Russia call it, a special military operation, thousands of combatants and non-combatants have lost their lives in the ongoing war. But in the arena of military and cyber warfare, it is very difficult to understand the perspective which is neutral and draws a middle line between both the parties. In order to learn about the reasons that led both the countries towards the war, we need to take a brief look on the history of both countries. Ever since the birth of the Russian Empire, most of the Russian people that called themselves Russians were actually ethnic Ukrainian. So we can say that people from Ukraine formed the Russian Empire, and eventually in 1993 they got independence. After the second partition of Poland, Ukraine became the part of Russian Empire. Time passed and passed. The rule of the Tsar, which is the Russian emperor equivalent to the king, came to an end. And after the First World War, the Bolshevik Revolution, the communists came into power and formed the USSR, called the Soviet Union. The model on which the USSR was to give very little autonomy the nations which joined the Union, while the security and sovereignty were ruled by the center in Moscow. After the Second World War, where the Soviets got a decisive victory over the Nazis, the further strengthened their ties with the Ukraine that was called Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic by placing most of their nuclear weapons and their entire Black Sea weapons, Black Sea naval fleet in the Ukraine SSR. Also, in order to strengthen the bond between the Russian SFSR and Ukrainian SSR of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev gifted the Crimean Peninsula to the Ukraine Sea. Crimean Peninsula is the place on which the conflict is going on. And after the Second World War, USA and USSR emerged as the two superpowers that divided the world into two, and after which both of the countries with their like-minded security organizations were the US formed NATO, which initially had 10 to 12 members. The USA wars had to sign the Warsaw Pact. During the period during the period between during the period organization NATO, the USA had two Warsaw Pact. During the period between 1945 and 1991, the world saw many wars that were indirectly fought between NATO and Warsaw Pact. But in 1991, the USSR collapsed due to the bad economic policies of the communist parties, and the USSR had to be dissolved into 15 different countries that included Russia and Ukraine, in which Russia was the biggest part of all. Ever since then, NATO, that was the supposed to counter the USSR military, was expanding towards the Russian border. The tension increased when the Ukrainian government in 2013 decided to join the NATO and resulted in a annexation of Crimea by Russia. After which the Ukrainians in 2018 started engaging with NATO in various military exercises, which was not acceptable to the Russians. The Russians started gathering their forces on the Ukrainian border, and after 5 months standoff with the Ukrainians in the region of Russian invaded Crimea, a full-scale invasion of Ukraine happened. But as they expected, with all their military might, the Russians were not able to sweep through the Ukrainian territory, and still they are defending ferociously against the Russians. Ukrainians are ferociously defending against the Russians. Thank you.